Morning, friends. This is Tony from Historic American Homes. We're back again with the next episode in designing our mid-century modern inspired small home using Sketchup Pro and Layout. Now that we've got the main spaces blocked out, including the kitchen and the bathrooms, we'll dive back into the main shell of the house and start refining some details. There were a few items, a few bits of detail that I was concerned about, but decided to put off until I knew that I had the overall big picture satisfactory. What we're going to be looking at here is the structural grid, the basic dimension that the whole house is built around. And I had initially laid that out by using a 6-foot patio door. This is a Marvin patio door as my main element, and then spacing everything around that. The Marvin patio door that I selected as the main this main element is 6 foot wide, and actually, let me get my tools here, my tape measure. Actual width of the patio door is 5'11", but it requires, in order to be installed, it requires an opening that is 6 feet wide. So I had spaced these 6x6 posts with a 6-foot gap between each post. There's one, there's the next post, there's the next. Now these are 6x6, which means in actuality their actual dimension is 5.5. They call it a nominal 6x6. The actual dimensions of the post are 5.5 by 5.5. That's standard wood framing in the United States, and everything I'm doing here is based on American standard construction standards, not European or Canadian or whatever else. So that was the way I had done the initial layout, and I was aware at the time that there was an issue I wasn't addressing, which I knew I would come back to, and here we are coming back to it. The issue has to do with how these doors and the windows above them are actually installed. We are looking to inspiration for these beautiful 1950s era, these mid-century modern homes where there's lots of glass coming right up to the framing of the wood. Here's another example. Now, in these two examples that I pulled up, I pulled these two up specifically because this one here, which is really the iconic image, I think, of a 1950s mid-century modern house, the glass just practically disappears right into the ceiling. You hardly see any kind of a frame at all around the glass. Now that's a really beautiful detail, but it is becoming more and more difficult to achieve on two fronts. One is that fewer and fewer contractors are capable of it. Those that can are charging more and more for it. And last, more importantly perhaps, is that it's simply very hard to achieve the building code requirements for energy efficiency with this kind of detail. So it's not really achievable on a reasonable budget these days. This other image here is a little bit less refined, but you can see that there's actually a frame around the glass that's in addition to the main structure of the house. So I'm taking this as the model. This is the approach we're going to use, because this allows for standard prefabricated doors and windows, which come with their frame already attached, to be set in place rather than have to be actually fabricated on site in place. Coming back to our little project, I want to show you some details here. This is a sectional view. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. This is a sectional view of the Marvin patio door, and here's the door frame. It's been cut through at the middle to save space on the page, but that's the top of the frame and the bottom of the door frame. And then this is the header. I should say this is the door panel, and this is the door frame, excuse me. This frame has a kind of a tab that sticks up at the top, and it also goes down the side. Let's see if they have a side view here. Here's a cut through horizontal section through a plan view. There's the tab. These are nailing fins, they're called, and they go on both sides and across the top, nothing at the bottom. And they nail into the framing of the house, and that's what secures the door to the house. It's a system that's easy to install, easy to waterproof, and easy to seal against air leakage so that it's very energy efficient. But it requires that there be a framing member to nail it to. If we go back and look at the openings for the patio door and the window above, we can see that the way it's arranged, I would have the sides and the top for the patio door, but I run into a problem with the window above, which is the way that the beam comes through, it would interrupt the fin that goes up the side of these doors. I have not actually modeled the fin on my door and window openings. That's a little more work, a little more fuss than necessary, but I knew it would be there. And if we come up here, got to imagine there's a nailing fin coming off the side of this jamb here. Once we get up to this point where we intersect with the beam, it's a conflict. It has nothing to connect to there. So the fin you would have to cut the fin, and that would void the warranty and make problems with waterproofing and air leakage. So what I'm doing now at this stage is I'm going back into the framing, and instead of a 6x6 post and a 6 by whatever this is going to need to be for the beam depth, I'm shrinking the post down to a 4x6, so it's going to become 2 inches narrower in this dimension but remain the same in the other dimension. And then I'm adding a 2x4 on each side, so the result is a kind of a sandwich where we have a post in the middle and then framing members on each side, and these framing members extend up the side of the beam. Here you can see that. Extends up the side of the beam, and that gives us a spot for our nailing fin to connect to. And for good measure, I've got one across the top which is sloped to match the slope of the roof. So this window above the door can be nailed around all 4 sides as it properly should be. The it means a small net increase in the space from one window to the next. That's 7.5 inches, and before we had 6.5 inches. So there's a 1 inch change overall, which is going to mean a slight adjustment to the spacing all the way across. But this will solve our problems of installing the doors and windows using the standard materials that are available. All this framing is going to get covered up by finishes, so you won't actually see these different framing boards. Again, that's partly because that'll allow us to use strong materials that are really strong but don't necessarily look very good, and then we cover them with a nice looking finish. And also these are materials that are more cost effective and more familiar for contractors to work with. Another thing I wanted to mention with regard to these details is corners. What happens at the corners? I had started with a square post 6x6 because I figured the walls in both directions are going to be 6 inch thick walls, and a 6x6 post would allow me at the corner would just allow me to turn the corner really easily, whereas a 4x6 post creates a bit of an issue because you've got a 4 inch width in one direction and a 6 inch in the other. So this is an issue that I will have to resolve, and I think I'm on the path to doing it. I'm going to come back around here. And what you see here, I've pulled elements out from the main frame, just pull them out here where I can get to them more easily. So that's my 4x6 post at the corner. It measures 3.5 on this face, on the left face, and 5.5 on the right face. That means that as I come around this little stretch of wall from the corner post to the shear wall over here, I've only got a 3.5 inch thick or a nominal 4x wall. So this is an element I still have to resolve. I've been planning from the start not to have a door. It's only a 3.5 foot opening, so no need for a door there. I was thinking of just a fixed pane of glass below and a fixed pane of glass above, and the framing at 4x will work for that. It will require a little extra attention to the insulation because I have less wall thickness, but again, that can be handled. I'm mainly just mentioning it here. I haven't got it thoroughly resolved yet, but I'm mentioning it because it's something that you need to think about in your project is what happens at corners. Depends on the nature of your design, how you handle the corner. I'm going to show you one other uh, element to this that ties into that. These patio doors that I originally modeled based on the Marvin French outward open outswing French door, they were the manufacturers all started making these doors back when 2x4 wall framing was the standard. So their jams, the jam sizes for their doors are all based on 2x4 wall. And then now that more and more construction is moving to 2x6, what they've done is they've added a jam extension to the inside. And you can see the way the frame is stepped, the way the frame is stepped into two parts. The part on the inside here is the jam extension. And so if you wanted to build a house with 2x4 walls, you could order this very same door without the jam extension and you'd be set to go. If you have 2x6 walls, you get the jam extension and it's all taken care of for you. Now there's nothing to stop you from using the 2x4 type door in a 2x6 wall. And that was not what I had anticipated when I started this design, but it is where I think I will probably end up going. So I made these doors so that it would be very easy to adjust, edit them in the future and remove that jam extension, which it looks like I will probably be doing. So I'm glad I made it that way. And the reason for that is that when I get to the corner, if I've got a 2x4 section on the left of the corner, and a 2x4 on the right, I can simply wrap that corner with trim lumber, and it will be easier to, there will be no conflict between the two doors as they, or the door and the window as they meet at the corner. The frames, the door jamb and the window frame won't be butting against each other. The space between them can be handled with finished materials on site. So I will work on this a little more and then come back to this with a very brief video showing the final result of those details. All right, I've got the doors and windows in place. I've worked on the corner. I made some custom sized windows to go into the corner. This rectangular one and this what do they call that shape? Trapezoidal one will need to be custom sized. I generally try to work with the standard sized units whenever possible, but since these are going to be fixed windows, they won't be opening. The custom sizing is not an expensive proposition. When I'm using something like a patio door, I try to stick with the standard sizes because getting custom sized operable doors and windows is more expensive. But since these are fixed, custom size is fine, and it allows me to really keep to the look that I want to have. Now, having done that, I wanted to look in a little bit at the way I can handle the finishes. I'm going to come over here, take a look in here. I applied some material textures, mainly just so that we can see the different pieces better. These are not necessarily the final finishes I'm after, but they allow us to differentiate the parts. The brown post and beam are the actual structural wall. This paler wood surface would be interior finishes. I'm going to turn the finishes off, and we can see the structural framework. We have the main posts. There's one here, there's one in the corner, and then we have, and those are 4x6 posts supporting a 4x12 beam. Then we have 2x4s on either side and 4x8 going across. It might be possible that to have avoided this 4x8 and to have the glass, the fixed pane mounted directly to the door, but that was going a little farther structurally than I felt comfortable with at this point. So I've added this horizontal kind of lintel across the top of the door, which will have a lot of structural benefits anyway, so I think it's a good idea and it'll look fine. Coming around the corner, we have the other corner post, we have another 2x4 next to it, and then we transition to 2x4 framing here. We have a 4x8 and a 2x4 across here. We have some wall framing below the window. Didn't carry that window all the way down to the floor, although it would be a simple matter to change that if I decide I want to. But I'm thinking that this wall here to the left is going to get some kind of fireplace and bookcase built in. And I think that that's going to come out into the room a little bit anyway. So it might be that the way the final finishes, interior finishes work out for that I would not necessarily want to have glass coming down to the floor. Also, that same wall, the opposite side of this wall, is master bedroom, and I'm toying with the idea of as I work on the interior some more, I may have glass up above. It's well above eye level, so it's not a privacy problem, and it might be nice to have passage of light across through the ceiling there. So for the time being, I've left this wall not going all the way up to the underside of the roof. So that's the framing inside. Now let's turn the finishes back on, and there's actually two layers of finishes here. You can only see the outer layer, so let me hide these first. Once the hang on. Once the doors and windows are in place, then and the walls are insulated, then we have a layer of gypsum board on the interior face of the wall framing. Serves a couple of purposes. Under normal circumstances, it's your finished surface wall. You plaster and paint it. In this case, I'm covering it all with trim, but it's got other reasons, not just finish. It's also there as a little bit of additional fire protection to the wall framing. So I like to have it even when it's not visible because of its fire protection properties. It also allows us to get another level of good air sealing between the window frame and door frame and the rest of the wall. So, and the way these cut standard sized frames, window and door frames, are made, they project inside the wall framing a ½ inch to allow for gypsum board. So I'm going to have a gap that has to be filled anyway if I use a standard size frame, standard size doors and windows. So the sheetrock basically brings that surface out flush with the frames. And then after that, the finish, the final finish goes back on. And in this case, it's probably going to end up being a paint grade wood. I'm probably not going to go with a natural colored wood trim, but just a paint grade wood. Anyway, that's the way the finishes will meet at the corner, because that's always an issue, is how do things meet at the corners. That's a tricky bit when you've got the exposed timber framing, and especially when you want to bring your glass as close to the corner as possible. But as you can see, everything comes together well at the corners, which was my main concern. And from the outside, let's take a quick look at some of the finishes on the outside. For now, I'm just going to use a kind of generic vertical siding, and I'll think about some refinements to that later. Same thing, works fine on the outside. The corner wraps around, so it looks nice and even on both sides. I'd like to leave as much of the beam exposed as possible. I'm not entirely sure I'll be able to do that, so it may end up that the wood siding comes up to the ceiling, and only this portion of the beam remains showing. I'll get to that later. Anyway, I know now that I've got feasible solutions for the interior and exterior finishes, and that was my main concern at this stage. I can fine-tune the details a little further on. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this piece, and I will leave you here. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and please subscribe. I'll continue to add to this as we develop this design further. It's going to be a complete house by the time we're done, along with construction drawings, not just a pretty model in SketchUp. Also, please leave a comment. I'm focusing right now more on the design elements and less on how to use SketchUp, because it seems to me there are plenty of videos about that out there already. But if there are specific SketchUp questions or specific design questions you want me to address, let me know in the comments, and I will certainly handle them in the next video. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.